They just block the street. And you have to figure out how you're going to get where you're going. So, I have some concerns about that because, you know, the city is hell bent on reducing parking, but we're creating problems with parking. So what are you going to do about the problems you're creating? Well, you're not going to do anything. You're just going to let the residents figure it out. So if somebody opens a restaurant in the bottom of their home, where is their parking for the patrons? Are they just assuming they're all walking?
Well, for the commercial uses in urban neighborhood, we are expecting, most of those patrons to either walk or bike there because it is very much going to be a neighborhood spot. If they're not walking or biking, they could take the bus, they could Uber. If they are going to arrive in an automobile, then they could street park, they could utilize a parking deck. And again, since these commercial uses are limited to 1,500 square feet, these are not going to be, like Walmart Neighborhood Market. This isn't going to be a Walgreens. This is probably going to be the guy who lives in your neighborhood who's always wanted to open up a little restaurant, so he's going to give it a go. So these are not going to be large uses that would attract a large amount of automobiles.
Unless they had really good food.
Right. And then, Counselor O'Quinn, back to your question about, well, can we have a restaurant but not an office? The live work, the restaurant would be limited to that 1,500 square feet overall. So that would mean that the restaurant would probably be 700, and if they're trying to live above it, that would be 700. So that is also somewhat unlikely, but they could still have their office and utilize that home office and have those two patrons coming. But those commercial uses are limited to 1,500 square feet overall, not just as a portion of the building.
So, um, that brings me to sort of another question is like that, you know, it seems like the proposed changes are very prescriptive in, things like square footage for specific purposes. So, um, how did you guys kind of arrive at those square footages? And because they vary, depending on the usage.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know,
So we chose 1,500 square feet because it matches the same scale as the traditional single family home. And one of the big concerns was that this would allow large scale commercial into the neighborhood. And so to make the neighborhoods comfortable that this will very much match the existing scale, we limited it to that 1,500 square feet.
but I seem to recall some places in here where it was significantly more than that.
Now, when you move up to mixed use low, there are different size requirements for mixed use low.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Because,
And I do want to say too, live work and mixed use low would be allowed, like what you're talking about, where the architect has his office and lives above it, and there wouldn't be restrictions on that.
okay. So that sort of leads me to yet another question that, in the past we've talked about form-based code, and for me, the form-based code is much easier to interpret than, abbreviations for different designations and, trying to envision verbiage and a lot of as you're going through this list on the permitted conditions thing, there's all these different types of businesses listed, and it's jumping from mixed use high and mixed use downtown to urban neighborhood and mixed use low, and so it's kind of hard to follow So for me, that form-based code and having some actual imagery, attached to this would be extremely helpful in the interpretation. So I know we've talked about it in the past.
We would really like to add pictures to this, and I believe that our urban design team has been working on that. They haven't given us anything yet, but we are hoping to have pictures with this in the future. And then for the form-based code, that is going to be those design standards that we've added. So that is kind of us dipping our toe into the water of form-based code.
Yeah, but
Well, our toes were already dipped in the water with form-based code because Highland Park's had it for, what, 10 years?
That's true. I guess this is the rest of the
Our
city
toes,
dipping
our
their toe.
toes are in the water. We just never did anything after they were approved, and of course I know why. But Witherspoon's gone. So, the rest of us would enjoy form-based code.
Yeah, I think what I would say is that, we're kind of in an awkward position, where we have the parallel zoning right now, and the zoning ordinance is like 600 pages or something like that. The form-based document was around 200, and so I think the feeling was that, we're kind of overcomplicating the process a little bit, when we, sort of have a hybrid ordinance like that, where you would have some traditional Euclidean zoning, then you would have a form-based chapter that's separate. And we just kind of felt like, that was overcomplicating the matter. The document's getting really large. And so what we decided was that we would create these mixed-use districts, incorporate some form-based standards into the districts, and I believe as an interim step. And we're hoping that over the course of the next couple of years, we could get back to developing a form-based code where we would sort of rewrite the ordinance all over again and incorporate, just like you're saying, a lot less words, a lot more graphics. And so I think for us, it would be better to do that in a comprehensive way, to look at the entire document. And so we kind of feel like this is an interim step to get us over the hump, get us through the framework planning process, rezone the entire city to the new districts, kind of set the stage and kind of start to move that direction. We feel like these mixed-use districts help us do that, help us, with the walkable neighborhood aspect. But then there still is that goal to rewrite the entire ordinance, from a form-based standpoint. I believe, and I think, the planning profession says that it's better to have an objective design ordinance like a form-based code that, is more prescriptive. And so it would help to limit, some of the kind of delays a design review committee in a way. If you had a good objective design ordinance that you could design to, the result is going to be something a design review committee is apt to approve very readily. And so that's the goal, to get to that point eventually. At the same time, when we do that, I think we want to create a unified development code where we put all of our development ordinances into one document, that would help kind of streamline and help developers understand our process better. So those are the goals that we have, going forward. We're hoping we can do that in, 3 to 4 years, or before I retire.
My
So-
personal feeling is form-based code should come first and then all
Well,
this other stuff.
Yeah, so that's where we're trying to get over this hump where we got this parallel universe, and it's kind of complicated matters where, a developer comes in and we say, oh, well, you're zoned under this old part of the ordinance. And so we just got to get over that hump and, but recognize at the same time that we do need to incorporate form-based standards, and we need to do it in a way that we can rezone, the rest of the city, in a way that, encourages mixed-use development, encourages walkable places. And so we feel like this does that, but it's not, 100% comprehensive. And so, I believe that, from what we've discussed and, going forward, we will look to develop a form-based code for the entire city.
Okay, but you're not gonna mess with Highland Park's form-based code, are you?
Well, that would be something that we would need to talk about, I think that, it has a foundation, you know, I think it's a good form-based document. I don't think there's anything wrong with it necessarily, but I think it probably wouldn't be a bad idea. You know, maybe the rest of the city would look like Highland Park. I mean, as far as their form-based code. But I think that's something we would need to discuss and figure out exactly how do we integrate that? Is it a separate document, or do we redo, you know, the entire form-based document for the entire city? That's a discussion we'd have to have.
Yeah, we just
It
don't
would
need,
end
we
up with
just
the
don't
same-
need to mess with Highland
It would end
Park.
up with the same principles, the same sort of standards. You know, they've already done their, survey, you know, the topologies and whatnot, and so that really hasn't changed. You know, so it wouldn't seem to me that there would be a need to change the housing type or the building type, you know, that's in the form-based code now. Maybe terminology changes a little bit or something like that, but it would equate to the same thing on the ground.
Yeah, I just think that that would be a mistake.
Yeah, well, like I say, you know, we
We
wouldn't
don't want
necessarily.
anybody tarred and feathered.
No, of course not. And so, but yeah, so I think that, like I say, when we move forward, you know, we would incorporate that in some way. It would either be, maybe it would, you know, remain on an island, or maybe it would just be incorporated into what we're doing otherwise. But it would, you know, it would need to be appropriate.
Well, you know, that was done in response to the construction of the Capri,
Yeah.
which looks like it belongs on Miami Beach.
Right. No, I
And,
know.
you know, that was just a disaster. But of course, it'll never go away. We're stuck
there.
with it. The
Yeah.
Vesta, we're stuck with it too. So we just need to make sure that we don't fool with Highland Park, who got it right when the rest of the city was left lacking. But I'd still like form-based code first. So, more questions?
I don't know. Here's a random one. So as soon as you put something, you know, in a document, there's folks who want to hack the system. So we see, people trying to figure out, you know, new ways of doing things. And one that, you know, I've heard about that I'm thinking about is sort of this, you know, out of the box, business model is that, you know, startup rents a single family dwelling, and uses it essentially as their office space. Of course, you know, that is not allowed, and would be a code enforcement issue. But, you know, my point is that it's, strikes me as, you know, what I want to say is, you know, this kind of strikes me as an exercise in futility, because as soon as you, you know, try to define what a business is, you know, somebody comes up with a new model. And so our code, is never going to be able to capture, you know, the entire gamut of what somebody might want to do with a structure. So I guess that leads me to the question is, you know, when somebody comes in, if they come in, and they want to do something that's, you know, not defined in our code, how do you as staff handle that?
I do it every day.
We look to the ordinance for the closest definition. So I think a good example of that is retail. For retail establishments, we just define as retail, so it's kind of a blanket definition. So if someone were to come in, you know, and say, oh, I want to do a bookstore, well, we don't define bookstore, so it would be considered retail. So we would have to look at the closest definition.
And I would add to that also, when we have those people that come in And it happens on a daily basis. There's always something new, like you said, going on. We ask them to provide a detailed description of their proposed operations in writing. A lot of times, once they think about it and write it down, it actually will fit into something that we do have in the zoning ordinance. If it does not fit into one of our standard definitions, like Jess said, we will try to see if it fits into another general definition. And sometimes we have to get together as a zoning administrator, the chief planner, and our deputy director and our director, and make an interpretation on whether or not this use that we don't define is allowable in a certain district in the zoning ordinance. Because like you said, we can't cover everything. And so that's kind of how we do it right now. But usually when you ask the individuals to write it and give you a detailed description, you do find similar language and other definitions that you can take from, or we provide the interpretation to them.
Okay.
Yeah, because limiting it to bakeries, retail, restaurants, and urban groceries, well, the bakery, the restaurant, and the urban grocery is well defined. Retail could be anything somebody wants to sell, including drugs. You know, and so, I mean,
That may technically be a pharmacy or a clinic.
well, yeah, it's retail.
Right.
So you can,
Actually, that's a good point.
as soon as
So,
we legalize marijuana, there'll be a marijuana store in the neighborhood. You don't have to walk very far, so you won't wreck your car while you're under the influence, but.
We do have a definition for those.
Yeah, will the residents be happy about having this, you know, it's like tattoo parlors. People don't want tattoo parlors in their neighborhood. You know, I mean, I'm sure those tattoo people are perfectly lovely,
so
but, you know,
related question, personal care services. That is pretty nebulous. You know, there's a lot of things that I could, including tattoo parlors, massage, and a lot of other things that typically, you know, people don't want right next to their
Right.
residence.
We actually did not have that in our original draft. The Public and Planning Commission requested that we add that in. I will say our interpretation of personal care services is something like a beauty shop or like a hair salon or a nail salon. So that is what we would interpret that use as.
oh, massage parlors and tattoo, I mean, you know, it's a slippery slope, and we seem to slip down slippery slopes very easily. That's how we got the drug rehab in the Glen Iris neighborhood, is the slippery slope. And so, you know, I just don't want to do anything to people who live in a neighborhood and feel like the city came and, you know, screwed them over. Because people usually do get that impression. So it seems to me we need a very concise and tight retail definition. And then personal services should not be retail, but they could say they're selling their retail. They could say they're retail. They could sell some nail polish to go along with their massages.
Yeah, personal care service does include spa, tanning salon, beauty, barber care, dry cleaning. So those are the things that are listed in the definition of personal care service.
So, and I'm maybe an outlier, and Counselor Abbott and I probably disagree philosophically on this, but, you know, I think a business is as good as its operator, you know, and trying to say that, you know, a barbershop is a more acceptable business than a massage, you know, therapist, is, you know, from my point of view, arbitrary and capricious. So, you know, and it really, you know, gets that's that sort of, over prescriptive, you know, trying to say what can go where, reminds me of, theocratic, governance where this code becomes your Bible and you are the priests and priestesses who determine, how this document gets interpreted and implemented. I don't want to do that. I mean, we do it a lot. It's kind of what government is, and that's what society expects. But there has to be some balance, and so good luck with the personal care services.
Like I said, we had requests for that one.
Well, let's leave it out anyway.
Yeah.
I can see that personal care could just turn into a issue from hell, and we know who gets all the complaints. It ain't the mayor. So, I'm protecting the future people who come in here. I think personal care just, that's where we have our prostitution, it just, I'm sorry, that's, maybe the quality of the operator is key, but if you get bad operators, then you've got bad problems in your neighborhoods. And this is where people live. And that brings up another question. Where is there a chunk of land to build this urban neighborhood district? Because you can't put it in between houses in an existing neighborhood. That would be kind of stupid. So where do we have blocks of land that we can create an urban neighborhood district?
So this is not going to be like we're going out and finding vacant blocks of land. We will actually apply this to like within a quarter mile. That BRT spine is one of the main areas that we're looking at. So here is that BRT route. So all along there within a quarter mile is for sure where we will be applying it. Once we get urban neighborhood passed, we would like to start the rezoning process for all of the framework plans, and that's where we will be creating the rezoning maps and specifically applying it in places and then taking that to the public to receive feedback on that. Right now, we don't have maps created yet, but we do have an idea of where we would like to apply it. And that is going to be within that quarter mile of the BRT, so you can live in a duplex, you can walk to the BRT, you can get to where you need to go. Those areas with narrow lots where a traditional single-family home, they're not going to be able to meet that square footage requirement, or in historically dense neighborhoods where what is already on the ground is what we consider urban neighborhood. So like those areas that have those buildings, they're built lot line to lot line, that is somewhere where we would like to see urban neighborhood. And again, that structure is already existing. It already fits our definition.
So, can we see some graphics of how this could actually work in Birmingham, not in Toronto or wherever, but how could it work? How would it work in Birmingham, in existing neighborhoods?
So I think this is kind of to the last question as well, but we have a lot of places that exist like this, like Glenwood Avenue, which is one block south in Forest Park of Claremont Avenue, is really a perfect example of where this already exists today. On the corner of that lot, you have a quadplex, then there's a series of duplexes, a series of townhomes, and then single-family homes interspersed. So, that's just one strip in Birmingham in Forest Park where this very much already exists. And today, that is spot zoned a lot. You have like, okay, this is D4, D3, D5, whatever allows it. The urban neighborhood would streamline that, and everything that currently exists on that street today would be legal and very compliant with this urban neighborhood district.
Are you talking about the village of Forest Park?
I'm sorry.
At the corner, I'm trying to picture where you're talking
So,
about this.
okay, so if you were driving past if you're on Claremont Avenue,
The golf course, you drive past
yeah,
the golf
drive
course.
past the golf course.
And you hit the
and then-
village.
Yeah, you hit the village. Go to that red light where you're about to head, down the hill towards Crestwood South. At that red light, that you could also turn left and go to Avondale Park. If you go right there, the Glenwood Avenue is the next street, and that street is a perfect example of urban neighborhood. Sorry, Jess, I want to share that example because it's a really good one.
I think another good example
Well, that's
is
in my district, and I'm gonna have to go drive over there and see what you're talking about. I don't know of any businesses that are in the neighborhood on Glenwood.
I think another good example is Fifth Avenue South, like going into Avondale. 41st Street acts as kind of that main street area. And then branching off from there, you have a lot of duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. That would be where the urban neighborhood goes. So it kind of acts as like a buffer between that 41st Street commercial area, then you have urban neighborhood, then you branch out further and get into that single family area of Crestwood.
That's your district.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and, to your point, I think some of that already exists, like Hunter was saying, it's sort of already there.
It does.
to some-
It's
to
very
There's a
much
ton
what we
of
already
apartments
consider
in
an urban
there.
neighborhood.
It's apartment city Johnson.
And again, these pictures on the screen, like this is an example of those housing types in urban neighborhood. And all of these were taken from that area going into Avondale, East Lake, Woodlawn, 5 Point South. Those areas that are already dense, that have these housing types that we would consider an urban neighborhood already.
It gets deeper the longer you talk about it.
I have another question. So, accessory dwelling units. I mean, this may be a conversation for beyond, urban neighborhood, but, in any case, I personally would like us to have that conversation about making accessory dwelling units legal in the city of Birmingham, and especially in single-family residential neighborhoods. So, am I right in thinking that that's for another conversation and not necessarily this one?
Somewhat. We are allowing ADUs in urban neighborhood, but we are also planning to have an ADU ordinance section where we would allow them, in single-family residential neighborhoods. But that is something that we are hoping to bring about probably next year.
So if you've noticed, you guys have been inundated with text changes to the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, we noticed
Right,
that.
so we didn't want to throw in the whole ADU they would be allowed in urban neighborhood. We didn't want to broach the entire conversation with ADUs and all single-family districts combined with this. We felt like that's kind of its own little issue, kind of like short-term rentals are their own separate beast that we kind of want to address. But once we get through this change, we do have short-term rentals that we'll be addressing in the zoning ordinance in the city code. We have some cleanups that have been needed for several years that we want to bring before you guys as well. And then I think the next project that we want to tackle as we work on finishing the rezonings for the rest of the framework plan areas would be ADUs. But we just felt like they deserved a separate conversation instead of trying to lump them into the changes that we have now. And we have overwhelmed you guys this year with text amendments, the landscaping, the parking, and this. So we didn't want to,
I don't feel
wear out our
overwhelmed.
welcome, with your consideration. So we'll give you a few months to catch your breath. before we jump back on the ADU bus, but it is coming. So
Well, ADU is on page 12 already. I'm sure.
they are allowed in D4 and D5 in the new zoning districts, and they would be allowed in urban neighborhood.
And they can
We
be the
just have
same,
not added them to the single-family residential districts yet.
so they can be the same size as the primary dwelling, as long as it's no more than 800 square feet.
But
Yeah.
yes, ma'am, but it will be coming, Counselor Oakland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so regarding setbacks, okay, if you're planning on putting this stuff into existing neighborhoods where they have setbacks from ancient times, so you're gonna have these things sticking out 3 feet from the sidewalk where other people's property had a 25-foot or more setback originally. It seems to me that's gonna look like something bad. So is that the plan?
Well, again, that is where we are focusing it on those historically dense neighborhoods because we have found that the historical structures really do match those design standards that we're requiring anyway.
Okay, so these aren't the neighborhoods that have the setbacks. These are neighborhoods with
No,
no
ma'am.
setbacks.
Like D3 single family neighborhoods, like E1, those large single family neighborhoods, they're the ones that have the 25-foot setback in the front, the 25-foot setback in the back, and then the 9 or 5 on each side. So that would not be where we're looking to put urban neighborhood. You know, historically in places like 5 Points South or Highland Park, their setbacks are not 25 feet. They're less than that. They are built closer to the street and the sidewalk.
Okay, but I guess my question is, are we going to stick with the setbacks we have, or are we gonna have these things sticking out as they go down the street? The new would be I think a 3-foot setback in front,
We
and,
still have a provision, for all districts that, we call it the established setback. So if you did have a structure in one of these urban neighborhood districts that was 25 on one side, 25 on the other, we wouldn't allow you to build to the property line with these new, you would have to line up with the established setbacks.
well, good, because
Yeah.
I think it would really look stupid.
Yeah, but I think what Jess was saying, the majority of the areas where I think we're hoping to target the urban neighborhood, there are gonna be a few outliers with those greater setbacks on the side, maybe on a corner lot where you have 2 frontages. But the majority of the areas, I think that we're looking at urban neighborhood have the setbacks that are closer to the street and to the sidewalk.
Well, and that was why I was asking for some drawings.
Right.
Just show us how it might look.
Like if
because-
someone were to build a new house in the
Yeah,
middle of a block,
in the middle
what
of a
would it
block.
look like?
Let's say something burned and they were gonna build something
it back.
back, well, will it be in conformity with the rest of the neighborhood, or will it be an intrusion where people go like, who allowed that?
Right.
So, can anybody draw? Because it seems like if we could have some drawings, just some sketches of how it would, blocks, it doesn't have
We
to be
can
a.
do that. We can
you know-
get, our urban design team to try and work with us.
Yeah,
on
like
some
if you had
sketches.
photographs of the neighborhoods that you were trying to do this in, and then whether you have blanks, you would show what could fit in and how it would
Right.
fit, so that people can visualize, because I'm a visual person. I can read all this blah blah on the pages, and until I see an example, see how it's gonna work, I'm kinda handicapped. And,
Yeah, so, to help maybe Counselor Abbott out, I know Woodlawn in particular is one of the target areas for this, and it's largely, kind of commercial retail currently. There's not a lot of residential in there currently, but First Avenue South, First Avenue North, in Woodlawn, in the 5500 block, so in the blocks in or around where the East transit station is, Rev Birmingham, Woodlawn Foundation, you know, I see that happening there. On the west side, I would think like the whole corridor along Sixth Avenue South, you know, would be a candidate for this type of zoning designation as well. What about like, I think Loam Avenue, which is part of the BRT route, a lot of that is actually single-family residential.
It is. There might be some areas along there.
But there's a lot of vacant land on there
It
unless
is. So
people,
a lot of, you know, if it were rezoned, then a lot of what would be built would be infill housing.
and are we building it or are we gonna go out and look for developers who wanna do this?
The goal is to have this urban neighborhood, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take
Oh,
over.
that's okay.
Yeah, but the goal would be that this would attract more developers to the city. You know, we have a number of developers who contact us. We want to build housing similar to this, but we don't have a zoning district that allows them to do it. There's not a lot of folks, you know, unless you're tower homes that want to do brand new ground up, large scale, single family residential subdivisions. And we actually don't have a whole lot of land for them to do it on, you know, unless you're in Oxmoor. So that's, hopefully this is gonna help attract more of those developers that we've talked with. We can work in conjunction with community development. They have some developers in mind that we can actually reach out to, and that will allow them to build a more affordable product in our neighborhoods to fill in some of these blighted vacant lots.
So can I reinterpret that? So the structures that you guys are proposing to be included in the code, currently those types of structures are illegal.
Some of the structures could be legal non-conforming once the property, we've got legal non-conforming across probably half the city.
But I'm talking about new construction. If I came in to get a building permit for a first floor retail with a residential above that has a 3-foot setback,
You could not do that right now without variances. It would, unless you wanted to do it in a mixed-use district.
so this would allow the use by right rather than having to go
Yes.
seek a
That's
variance.
correct, or without having to go to ZBA for a special exception. And this is, I know you guys are familiar with like our R4 and our D4 district. They're kind of that in between the single family and the multifamily where you have the larger apartment buildings. This is kind of like a hybrid of that. We don't use the D4 a lot. There's little pockets of it scattered all over. But this has helped to provide more opportunities for those developments that we get calls about all the time. And honestly, when we get the telephone calls, developers do not want to spend 4 months to rezone properties. They do not want to take their chances on variances with our zoning board of adjustment. So we did take into consideration a lot of the feedback from the current market, what they're looking to build and what they can afford to build in Birmingham.
Yeah, you can sit down.
So Counselor Abbott, I would be comfortable delaying a decision on this for the moment to give us more time to digest it.
I'm in agreement with that. What I'm thinking is though, that we really need like a workshop with pictures for the entire council to understand this. Because, I mean, I think about my ancient history of the old ordinance and the new ordinance, and R4A actually was a pretty good zone district. You know, it didn't offend very many people. But, you know, we're talking about shrinking down the sizes of lots and doing lots of things. And then the ADU issue, there will be people who will just have a cow over you know, squashing little huts in the back of people's yards, and then the next door neighbor, you know, I can just see that being hell on wheels. So I really think that the full council needs to understand what we're getting into.
Would y'all like to do like one-on-one workshops? Kind of like how we did with parking?
It seems to me that having a, you know, I don't know, dedicate a whole committee of the whole to it, or even have a special meeting, but I just think when you're doing something that's such a major change, that everybody needs to understand what they're getting into, because, once again, we're the ones who get all the complaints. They don't seem to bother the mayor. So, you know, I'm just thinking, everybody needs to understand that this is like a major change, and that there will be some people that think it's great, and there will be a lot of people that think it's horrible. And they're gonna get the blame. I mean, the council will get the blame for whatever, because we're the ones they see every week. So I think everybody needs to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. For instance, we built the BRT with no thought, apparently, to where it was going and whether there was anybody there that wanted to go anywhere. We just built it and they will come, and they didn't. You know, what a dumb thing to do. But I guess it's sort of like,
Wouldn't agree with that statement.
kind of like, well, I mean, clearly there was no plan about where it was going, because there are no people along the way who want to ride it.
There's a lot of people riding it.
There's 10. I mean,
No,
when I see it, when I see
Twenty
it, it's,
thousand trips a month.
yeah, I believe that when I see it. When I see it, doesn't have hardly anybody on it. So I just think that, you know, it's typical government stuff, you know, that build it and they will come. But anyway, I just think everybody needs to understand it, like all 9 people on
I
the
agree.
council. And especially the ones where it could happen to them. For instance, in my district, it won't be there, we're not near BRT. But in, like, Smitherman's district, the BRT runs through, half of the line is in District 6. So that's a big deal.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, my feeling is everybody needs to be in on this, but I'm in agreement also, as many times as I've read this, I see something new in it every time I read it.
I think drawings will be extremely helpful. I would also suggest that, you know, maybe you take some overheads of downtown Woodlawn and, you know, perhaps envision an overlay, you know, do a conceptual, like a mock-up of what, or of how urban neighborhood designation could transform, you know, that area. You know, do something similar for an area within Councilor Smitherman's, you know, district. I think those types of tools would be helpful for us getting our heads around it. And you know, I was trying to read this earlier, you know, and
It's a lot of words.
it's just hard to stay awake. I mean,
Yeah, you can read it before bedtime.
yeah, it's,
Yeah, if you're an insomniac, it's really good.
yeah. Here's a new, maybe a new vocabulary word for you, supperific. Look that one up.
Now say that again.
Supperific.
Subberific.
It means to be sleep inducing.
It's very exciting stuff.
Yeah, but I just think that council members need to understand what they're getting into. You know, and especially with allowing commercial mixed in with the residential. You know, like I build a house and I'm a baker, so I put a bakery in the bottom and then I sell it, and the next guy says, well, I'm gonna have a double bakery. I'll put bakery upstairs and downstairs. They'll never know. Well, that wouldn't be allowed legally, I assume, to convert the whole structure into a business.
As long as it's smaller than 1,500 square feet.
Well, yeah,
But yeah, if y'all would like to do one-on-one meetings, or we can come to committee of the whole, you know, we'd be happy to do either one
well,
or
the one
both.
thing that's good is when you hear other people's questions, a lot of times it kind of makes you think. And if we all have little individual meetings in our offices, then we don't get to have the gift of the expertise or the questions of our colleagues. And I think that is always
I would
important.
suggest that we actually do both,
Okay.
because,
Well,
you
maybe
know,
have the big one first and then sub it down, to the individuals so that after you see the grand picture, then you can sort of start focusing on your own district and what could happen there.
that could work, that could work.
So we'll definitely get with leadership and work with GA and, figure out what is best. And we'll probably do exactly what you're talking about, but leadership and GA, I think would work together to make that happen.
Yeah, because the council's gotta be comfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, you got any more questions or you're tired of asking questions?
Yeah, I'm a little fatigued of asking questions, but I certainly have some more questions for a later time.
All right, well, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And those drawings and sketches and things are very important. I really want to see how it's going to work, So, that really is the only item that we have on
I
our,
was just wondering if you guys had received any applications.
yes, we received some and some of them look good and,
Oh, great, okay.
yeah. So,
Fantastic.
Did anybody send y'all anything that?
I think the only one I received, it was several weeks ago, I sent it on to Dr. Lee, so
Yeah.
you should have it.
Yeah, we've got some, and actually, I think we got one today, which is, long after the deadline, but,
Okay,
we'll have to discuss that.
okay, thank you for the update.
Yeah, but we did get some,
Great.
and it wasn't after the first announcement, it was after like the second one when
Okay.
there was only like a few days
If you
left.
didn't get any, I was gonna see if we needed to, call some folks, but if you've got some great candidates, that's fantastic.
Yeah, we got some that look good on paper anyway.
Great,
We'll have to
thank
talk
you.
to them.
Okay.
Because the key is, if you don't attend the meetings, it doesn't matter that you were good on paper. And we do seem to
I
have,
second that.
we do seem to have a problem with attendance. And, so we've got to make sure that these people are really committed, because don't take the job if you're not committed.
And we've told Dr. Lee, thank you, we appreciate his help calling members, especially ZBA, and encouraging them to attend our bi-monthly
Yeah,
meetings.
and in the past, the staff has stayed on top of attendance. We used to receive a sheet that showed who attended and who didn't, and after you missed enough, you got the letter that says, if you can't be here, you need to resign.
And we've done letters, and it's the same old story. It gets better for a month or two, and then it falls back in the same pattern. So the telephone call from your office really helped.
Well, Dr. Lee is a persuasive person.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank y'all. I appreciate your support with that.
Okay, well, we are
Motion to adjourn?
second.
Adjourn.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank y'all very
And thank you for the handouts, even though I have numerous copies, it's always good to have.
You can just add them to your collection.
Yes, the collection. The parking section and the,
This is one of our planning commissioners who comes to all of our meetings.
and I found your appointment letter when I was cleaning out a box of stuff the other day, and I thought,
He's filling in